Okay, Tommy, second round. You're a member of the UN panel of experts on Liberia. Oh, you were, well, but maybe you still can answer the question which comes. And you are monitoring the humanitarian impacts of the sanctions which were imposed by the Security Council. Liberia and Sierra Leone are in a process of post-conflict reconstruction. What's the role that the international community in helping governments in poor and politically unstable countries to ensure that the exploitation of natural resource does not lead to armed conflict? What can the international community contribute to preventing,
yes,
kind of conflicts on natural resources?
Just let me make one thing clear. I'd like to rephrase the word poor, replace the word poor with resource-rich countries with a lot of poor people.
Okay, sure.
Because I spent the last 5-10 years of my life trying to convince people in Africa that we're not poor, because it is that mentality of we are poor that creates this dependency syndrome, which has become the biggest impediment to development. To answer your question directly, from my honest viewpoint, I don't think that the international community has succeeded in preventing natural resources, the exploitation of natural resources, and linking to conflict. I mean, the war in Liberia was raging for 10 years, the same in Sierra Leone, before some concrete interventions took place, even though it was clear from the very outset that this was a war that was linked to diamonds, or in the case of Liberia, that there was timber involved in it. The reasons I cannot go into, because it's debatable, everybody has their own perspective. What is clear is that a lot of people suffered, there was a lot of needless destruction, and the countries have been set back by many, many decades. And it's a real pain to live and work in this kind of situations now, when you're talking about catching up in the 21st century. And of course, if we go across from the west to the east, we can see that already there is still this issue of natural resources and conflict related, for example, the DRC or Darfur. That's already another can of worms I'm not going to open. But just the positive side of it is that because of these conflicts, there has been a recognition at the highest level of international thinking that while it should be understood that natural resources should lead to development, in our case, their mismanagement have led to conflict. And the process of resolving these conflicts have created a lot of opportunities for people in these countries to understand about peacekeeping operations, for example. Sierra Leone at one point had 15,000 peacekeepers. Now Liberia has a lot of peacekeepers. And a lot of learning is happening in how to manage natural resources. This, of course, you know that there was a complete collapse in states. It was a failed state, basically. Law and order completely broke down. So what has happened in the last 5 years, at the very least, is that in the case of Liberia, for example, the entire forest sector was being reformed. And that's where you could say concretely that the international community, especially the United States Agency for International Development and the European Union, invested the resources to reform the forest sector. There is the Kimberley process, which establishes a certification scheme to ensure that diamonds, blood diamonds cannot make it to the international markets. So these kinds of regulatory mechanisms have been put in place as a result of international interventions. But I think that the problem still remains that it is sometimes better to invest a lot less money to prevent conflict than to invest so much money to address the impacts of conflict and then create this mechanisms that in themselves are good, but because there are so many problems that the people are dealing with now, these mechanisms are not so effective. The Kimberley process, for example, in Sierra Leone is working, maybe, but there's still talk about a lot of smuggling happening. So how can you measure the benefits of this? That is another question.
Thank you very much. You have shown how a bad question can lead to a great answer.